The loaf. Man's livelihood through the ages. The story of wheat and its transformation into bread. The Maltese Islands, an archipelago bursting with history, arts and culture, and various rulers left some traditions behind them. The way of living of the Maltese people flourished, as did its history. Most probably the first settlers came from Sicily. In fact, we know that wheat used to be imported from Sicily well before the arrival of the Knights of St. John to Malta. The latter made sure that there were enough provisions of wheat for their perusal. Therefore, they excavated and built what used to be called silos, and which are nowadays known as the granaries. We can still find some of these granaries in St. Elmo, Valletta, St. Angelo's, Vittoriosa, and in Floriana. Therefore, one can safely say that as from 1530, wheat growing was flourishing well in Malta. The miller used to grind the wheat in small quantities and distribute it to each and every household. The first stage of grinding is into bran and eventually into flour. It is interesting to note that the Maltese loaf knows its present format since the presence of the Order of St. John. In fact, one can notice the similarity between the Maltese loaf and that of the bread made in Rhodes, where the Order of St. John was prior to its settlement in Malta. Wheat was a daily need and also a means to do business. In the year 1584, Grand Master Hugh Lubin de Verdal built elite bakeries which were used to bake bread and water biscuits for the people on the galleons. Unfortunately, this building was demolished in 1934 to make way for a block of apartments. Another group of bakeries were built in Vittoriosa in the year 1645. These were equipped with the best technology one could find in those days and were used to make bread and water biscuits for the Navy. Apart from these, there were many other private bakeries scattered around the Maltese Islands. Many of these were located in Qormi. We know through history that Qormi used to be known as Casa al Fornaro. It was given this name because of the multitude of bakeries which could be found in Qormi during those days. During the First and Second World Wars, Malta experienced a shortage of wheat. The bread during the World War II had a black crust. Bread making in the olden days. As soon as the miller distributed the bran and the flour, the housewives started making the dough. Usually this used to be done by hands and feet. However, this custom was eventually withdrawn by law because of the possibility of lack of hygiene. Bread was made only once a week. In those days, the dough used to be made by the household. Then the baker would pass by and he would take the bread to bake in his oven. At about 10 p.m, the baker would send a young lad around to tell the housewives to start making the dough. The ingredients were flour, yeast, salt, water and tinsila. This was a small piece of dough from the previous mixture. When the dough was ready, it used to be left to settle for about 3 hours. At about 2 a.m, the baker would send the boy around again to inform the housewives that it was time to fold the dough. In the meantime, the baker would be warming up the oven with logs that were brought over to him by these same people. Each family used to put its mark on the folded dough, so that they would recognize their bread when they went to the baker to collect it. The women would then go with their product to be baked. As we can see, all this used to be done during the night. The morning after, the baker would load all the baked bread onto his bread cart and distribute the bread to its owners. The bread cart used to be a huge box drawn by a mule. This had 2 doors at its rear, and inside one could see some shelves where the baker would put the bread. He would also have a set of scales with various weights, which he would use to weigh the loaves. The people of Qormi are often teased that they do business only till noon. There may be 2 reasons for this. The first is that a sundial on the St. George's Church belfry used to stop at noon, because after that the dial would be in the shade. Whilst another version might be that after making their rounds selling bread all morning, the bakers would go home, have lunch, drink some wine and have an afternoon nap. By time, the Maltese loaf was improved. Other foreign types of bread were introduced in Malta, but the Maltese loaf never lost its importance. When one learns that despite the long period and the different phases that the Maltese loaf has gone through, one cannot but appreciate more all that is ours. We can mention, for example, the tradition of baking the Sunday roast at the baker's. One cannot but also mention the delicious taste of a slice of Maltese bread with tomatoes, capers, olives, cheeselets, and with olive oil. Through the years, the working hands were replaced by big machines. The dough was no longer worked manually. Most of the bakers switched their oven to electricity and discarded the logs. Although this progress has its advantages because the work is done quicker and with the same good quality, we are missing the local baker and the traditional bakery. The Maltese loaf was, is and will remain an important element in the Maltese diet. Our aim is to stress the importance of our loaf, the Maltese loaf, and encourage our fellow citizens to appreciate more and be proud of our culture and traditions, because these are part of our heritage and we are obliged to safeguard it for the benefit of our future generation.